Hey everyone, welcome back to Windows C Studies. I hope you all are doing well. So we were discussing cell biology, and from today onwards we are going to discuss about cellular signaling. So this lecture is kind of a basic discussion about what is cell signaling and how cells are able to communicate with each other. So the way humans behave. So the innate behavior of humans is that they acquire the information that is available to them in their environment, or they respond to certain stimuli. So they respond accordingly, and that is our innate behavior. And in the same way, cells also have a nature to respond to various stimuli. So whenever cells gather this information which is available to them in surrounding and respond accordingly, they need to follow a repertoire of processes, and that is known as cellular signaling. So just the way we need to communicate with each other, cell also needs a way to communicate each other, and the communication between the cell is simply referred as cellular signaling. So what happens is that whenever there is a, let's take an analogy. Like for example, whenever I'm saying anything to you, the language is the medium between us. So you are listening to my words, you are interpreting that words, and then you are responding accordingly, right? In the same way, cells also respond to these certain signal molecule, to certain chemical signals that are present in their extracellular environment, which may be secreted from other cell, or which are just present there, simply just existing there. So those chemical signals that are present extracellularly, they are referred as extracellular signal molecule. By the way, this image I have taken this from Bruce Alberts. So there's a very nice and detailed chapter about cellular signaling. So if you want to still know more about cell signaling, how cell signaling occurs, what are the mechanical processes that it follows, you can refer to that chapter. So, well, I was discussing that behaves accordingly to whatever stimuli has been given, and those chemical signal, they act, or they behave like a stimulus to the cell. So those are known as extracellular signal molecules. So those extracellular signal molecules, they could bind to the receptor proteins that are present either on the cell membrane or inside the cell in the cytoplasm. So let's again go to our analogy. So whatever words I'm speaking, the language is the way of communicating between each other, right? So whatever I'm saying, that is being heard by you, being received by your ears. Okay, and your ears are now the recepting unit, they are the receiving unit. In the same way, in the cells, whatever chemical signals are being secreted by other cell, that are received by receptor protein. So once your ears, they are listening to some words, the whatever message is being produced, that is sent to the brain so that the message can be interpreted. So this interpretation represents the downstream signaling that happens in the cell. In the same way that the words, they are being heard, and then they are being processed in your brain, and then you start behaving accordingly. This whole repertoire of us behaving is, it is very analogous to the way cell behaves. So the extracellular signal molecules, they are, when they are bind to the receptor proteins, so they are also referred as ligands. Okay, and when ligands, they bind to the receptor protein, that is known as ligand receptor interaction. So this receptor proteins, they could be present on the cell surface. If the, let's say, if the molecule, this molecule, the extracellular signaling molecule, is highly polar, it is large and polar molecule. So as we know that plasma membrane, a lipid bilayer, which is amphipathic in nature, the polar molecules, they cannot pass through this, right? Only non-polar molecules can pass through. So whatever hydrophilic molecule are there, they will just go and attach to the cell surface receptor proteins. But let's say that there is some hydrophobic signaling molecule, so it can easily cross the plasma membrane. So the receptors for such molecules, such cellular signaling molecules, they are present intracellularly. So there are two types of ligands, one that can bind to the receptor, or other that can bind to the intracellular receptors. The ones that can bind to the intracellular receptors, obviously they are hydrophobic in nature, so that they can pass the plasma membrane. So once the ligand receptor interaction is done, that triggers a downstream process, a downstream signaling process. It is called downstream because it is happening, it is getting triggered after certain event, right? So it is happening just right before the ligand receptor interaction, and that usually takes place in the cytoplasm of cell, and that is known as the downstream signaling or the intracellular signaling. So once the ligand binds to the receptor protein, the conformational changes could be seen in the receptor protein, such as it could get phosphorylated, like it could get the phosphate group can be added on the same receptor protein, or it could trigger the phosphorylation of some other proteins. So whatever changes are going to occur, they are going to occur to the proteins that are present inside the cell, and they are going to relay the message. So such molecules that are going to relay the message inside the cell are known as secondary messengers. Okay, so so the primary, the primary messenger is the ligand molecule that is going to bind to the receptor, and once it binds to the receptor protein, it triggers some downstream cascade, and in that the secondary messenger molecules are created, then which then results into the production of effector protein. So, for example, when I started this lecture, I said hello to you all, right? So whenever I am saying I'm pronouncing certain word, it is being heard by your ears, and then your brain is processing that. And once the interpretation of my language is done, now your brain is going to decide the way you are going to respond, right? So if I said hello, so you will take it as a greeting, and you will say, okay, I need to greet her back. So that is the way your brain is going to process it, and you are going to respond. So you will be responding either in words or in actions. In the same way, cell responds in the language of proteins. So whatever signal is being received, that signal results into an output known as proteins, and those output proteins are known as effector proteins. So they could be of multiple types. The way you are going to respond, there's a wide spectrum of your response, right? You could get angry, you could get happy, you could get sad. So that just one word could trigger you. So the whatever response is being given by you, it is widely, it can vary widely, right? It is a wide spectrum of the responses. In the same way, cell can also respond in various ways, but the basic, like the main ways of response, the main output proteins of response are of certain category. For example, the way you're going to respond, it could be either words or some action, right? In the same way, whatever cell is going to respond, it will be in a form of certain effector proteins. It could be certain enzyme, it could be certain the regulatory protein, or it could be cytoskeletal protein. Why? Because if, let's say, that cell is sensing some source of food, so cell needs to move. That is why whenever, let's say this is a bacterial cell, and these are the receptors on the bacterial cell which are specifically designed for some chemicals, or some food. Let's say that they are designed for glucose molecule. So whenever glucose goes and bind to this receptor, it is going to start some downstream signaling, and it is going to result into some cytoskeletal protein formation in the direction where the glucose is being received, because this is a kind of signal for that bacterial cell that food source is in this direction, and you need to move in this direction. Or let's say that during the cell division, you need to alter the shape, you need to form the spindle fibers. So during that times, you need to form cytoskeletal proteins. Or let's say that you have to move certain organelles within the cell. For example, in the plant cells, the chloroplast, they are usually arranged in the direction of the light. So for whatever whatever signal is being received from the environment or from the other cell to the by the target cell, accordingly it responds. So the one of the responses could be formation of cytoskeletal proteins, because most of times, so the way, whenever you sense a danger, you are going to run towards certain direction, you are going to move in certain direction. So locomotion is very important. In the same way, inside a cell or the movement of whole cell itself is very important, and for that matter of purpose, cytoskeletal proteins, they are formed in downstream signaling. The other way of response by the cell is the formation of the regulatory proteins, the proteins that are going to regulate transcription. So they could be activators or they could be inhibitors. So activators, or they could be co-activators as well. So co-activator is the protein molecule that is going to activate the activator, so that activator can go bind to certain transcription factor, and now the transcription factor will be activated, and that can that can result into the gene expression of that certain element, that certain gene. So in this in the same way, you could express inhibitor proteins as the effector proteins. So you could express the inhibitors as an output, so that they are going to inhibit the cell cycle. For example, let's take the example of tumor cells. So what happens is that in the tumor cells, they produce growth factors. By the tumor cell, they express the growth factors which will signal the same tumor cell or the tumor cells in the locality, in its surrounding, that now you have to grow. So that those growth factors are going to send the signal to that particular cell that you need to divide. So they are going to produce the activators that are going to result into the continuous cell division. So this is how effector proteins could be either transcription activators, transcription factor activators, transcription factor inhibitors, or the transcription factor itself. So there's a wide variety of how transcription could be regulated by those regulatory protein, but this is going to result into the altered gene expression eventually, right? The other way of response by the cell could be producing certain enzyme itself, so that the enzyme can catalyze certain reaction which can further signal to which can further result into some other signal, or which can directly disrupt or alter the metabolism. So these are the main categories by which a cell could cell could respond. So either it can form metabolic enzyme to alter the metabolism directly, or it can alter the gene expression by producing transcription regulatory proteins, or it can alter cell shape or movement by producing cytoskeleton protein, right? So this is the basic schematic of how a cell signaling goes on inside the cell. So whatever cell is responding to, the extracellular signaling molecule, it could be produced by certain other cell which is present in its locality, or it could be produced by the same cell, or it is just present in that microenvironment in the extracellular matrix, right? So the whatever extracellular signal molecule is there, those cues can be produced by any cell. Yeah, so we are assuming that it is being produced by certain cell. Many of the times the signal could be light. Okay, signal could be stress, so signal could be pH change. So signal could be anything. There's no, there's no such requirement for cell signaling to happen that you need certain extracellular signal molecule. But here we are talking about intercellular signaling. So whatever signaling is happening between two cells. So in the cell signaling part, we are going to discuss about how a cell can communicate with other cells. So we are only going to discuss the intercellular signaling. And that is why the schematic is very important, because this is a kind of universal schematic representing how other cell produces this extracellular signal molecule and how the downstream process happens, right? So this extracellular signal molecule could be produced by any type of cell, and depending on that there are different types of signaling. So there I have the image for that. So here it summarizes the different types of signaling that are present, that are seen, that are observed inside the biological systems. So the very first is known as contact dependent signaling, which is also known as juxtacrine signaling. Okay, so this juxtacrine signaling happens when the two cells which are signaling, which are talking to each other, which are communicating with each other, they are directly in contact. They have direct physical contact. So this direct physical contact could be in form of any tight junction, any junction, such as tight junction, gap junction, desmosomes, right? So those type of junctions, they are formed between two cells, and that they are physically adhering to cells, right? So whenever two cells, they are in physical contact, contact and they are talking to each other, they are communicating with each other, that type of signaling is known as contact dependent or juxtacrine signaling. So here you can see that a signaling cell is producing a signaling molecule which is membrane bound. Why? Because both of the cells, they are directly physically in contact. So this signaling molecule can target the receptor present on the target cell, and that is how it is going to result into intracellular signaling, which is also known as downstream signaling. So it can produce secondary messenger molecules which can result into any of the responses that we discussed about. So this is known as juxtacrine signaling. But let's say that a signaling cell which is going to produce signal, whatever signal it is producing, it is not meant for the cell which is in physical contact, but for the cells which are not in contact but they are present in locality, right? So this type of signaling is known as paracrine signaling. When a signaling cell produces signal and that are sent to the nearby cells, the ones which are present nearby, they are locally present, they are not far away present, but they are not in physical contact. So this is also important point. So those signaling molecules, they can be present in the extracellular matrix, and they can go and bind to the receptor of the target cells, and the target cell will respond accordingly. So this type of signaling is known as paracrine signaling. The synaptic signaling, where the synapse is formed, we have discussed this in great detail in our neurobiology classes, so you might already know about this. So when a neuron forms synapse with other neuron, that is known as synaptic junction, or the synaptic way of signaling. So a nerve cell produces neurotransmitter that is packaged in the synaptic vesicles, and those synaptic vesicles, they will fuse in the presynaptic terminal. They will fuse with the membrane of presynaptic terminal, and the neurotransmitter will be released in the synaptic cleft, the region, the space between the two neighboring cells, the two nerve cells. And those neurotransmitters, they will be received by the target cell, by the receptors that are present on the target cell, and the downstream signaling will happen. So this is known as synaptic way of signaling. So the target cell could be some endocrine cell. So this in the neuroendocrine cells, this type of signaling happens, or it could be a muscle cell, or it could be other nerve cell, right? So we have discussed about this in great details in our neurobiology classes. The other type of signaling is known as endocrine signaling, and this is a very special case of signaling where whatever signal is being produced, it is usually hormone. So hormone is the chemical signal, and that is released in bloodstream. So here you can see in the paracrine signaling, whatever signal is being produced, it is just secreted out of the cell, and the cells which are present in the locality, they are receiving it. But in the endocrine cell, this is a way of, this is a long distance signaling, because a certain cell, let's say the cell in hypothalamus, or certain cell in your testicles or in your ovary, it is secreting certain hormone, and that is then secreted into bloodstream so that it can cover long distances, and it can work on the target cells. So the target cell will have receptor for those hormones, and they will respond accordingly. So endocrine signaling is long distance signaling, while contact dependent, paracrine and synaptic signalings, they are short distance signaling, right? There's one more type of signaling which is referred as autocrine signaling. Okay, so let's assume that this signaling cell, it is producing certain certain chemicals. Okay, it is secreting certain chemicals which are going to act on the receptor which is present on the same cell. Okay, receptor present on the same cell. So let's say that there's a receptor present where those signaling molecules can act. So the signaling molecules is produced by a cell, and the receptors for that signaling molecules, they are present on the same cell. Means a cell is signaling itself. So whenever the signaling occurs by like the signaling molecule which is produced by a cell, and it signals to the same cell, that is known as autocrine signaling. So it is very obvious from the name autocrine, means cell signals itself. So a cell produces, so this is a cell and that produces, chemicals which will act on the receptors of that same cell. So this type of signaling is autocrine signaling, which is widely seen in tumor cells. So when we were discussing about cancer biology, we talked about this a lot, that how the cancer cells, they produce their own growth factors, so that those growth factors can be received by the tumor cell itself, and the tumor cell has, the has a full control over its cell division, and the cell can divide uncontrollably, and that is how tumor cell, surpass the normal cells. So they produce their own growth receptors and the signal themselves that they have to grow. And so this could result due to certain genetic mutation. So in a single cell, certain genetic mutation happens. So the cells which are producing growth factors in a right amount, which was signaling to some other cells, but now due to certain mutation, the cell, produces growth factors, and the growth factor receptors that are present on the stem cell, they are receiving those growth factors, and and due to this reason, the cell is growing, the cell is dividing uncontrollably, and that is how tumor cell forms. So the famous example of autocrine signaling is the tumor cells, right? So here I'm done with the basics of cell signaling. So we have discussed what is cell signaling, how the cell, they are able to communicate with each other, the basic way, the basic repertoire of cell signaling that is seen. So as I already said, that there are different types of receptors, right, depending upon whether they are present. So the receptor could present on the cell surface, so they are known as cell surface receptors, or the receptors could be present intracellularly. Okay, so in the cell signaling lectures, today we discussed basics. So tomorrow we'll be discussing some types of cell surface receptors. So there are different types of cell surface receptors. There are the widely studied ones are the GPCRs, G protein coupled receptors, the RTKs, tyrosine kinases, receptor tyrosine kinases, which are also written as RTKs, receptor tyrosine kinases, and there are ionotropic receptors. So we will be discussing about them in detail. So RTKs, they come under the category of enzyme coupled receptors. Okay. So here they are coupled with the tyrosine kinases, which are going to phosphorylate tyrosine residue. So the GPCRs they are the G protein coupled receptors. So they are coupled with the G protein, where the GTP hydrolysis is used for the signaling. So we will be discussing about GPCRs in a very detailed manner. We will also discuss about enzyme coupled receptor, in which we will be specifically discussing about receptor tyrosine kinases, and we have already discussed about ionotropic receptors, the receptors which are coupled with ion channels. So whenever signaling occurs in the nerve cells, the that signaling triggers the opening of ion channels. That type of receptors are known as ionotropic receptors. So when we were discussing neurobiology, we have already discussed about ionotropic receptors in great detail. So if you don't know about them, please visit that lecture. I won't be discussing this here. We will only discuss about GPCRs and the enzyme coupled receptors. So today I conclude with the basics of the cell signaling. Tomorrow we'll see you again. Bye bye.